And after having stonkered you into silence with that introduction, let us bring out our special guest, Mr. Randall Wallace. Oh, look at this. Yeah, go ahead. Absolutely. Okay, that's about enough.
Thank you so much.
Let's get what brought you to do this film, and sort of where were you career-wise, personally, when you started this?
Just before I answer that, I have to get rid of my nerves a little bit here. I want to just say, I'm standing here getting more and more nervous. On my way down here, my son said to me, "How do you talk in front of a group of people? That would scare a lot of people to death." And I went, "It's no problem at all for me, son." I was standing over there thinking about sitting out in the audience in this theater. It was different when I first sat here and watching films, and to get to make a movie like Braveheart seemed like, as far away as Pluto. And so I'm so thrilled and honored, and I feel such a connection to all of you out there who would come tonight because of this movie. So thank you. The briefest version I can give of that answer about how I came to write this was that I always wanted to be a writer. When I was growing up, I lived in Tennessee. My grandmother owned a country store, and they had, I know this makes me sound like, Little Abner or Elmer Fudd or somebody, but she had a country store, and there was a pot-bellied stove in the middle of that store. And behind it were sacks of pig feed, and I made a desk there and wrote adventure stories when I was probably 8 or 9 years old.
Amid the pig feed.
Amid the pig feed. I loved writing, and I felt that writing, it just involved me. I didn't have a sort of overall value judgment about it. I just loved to do it. And I wanted to do a lot of different things in my life. I did not come out to California even with the idea that I would ever be involved in making movies. But with each step I took, it sort of opened up another opportunity. It made me think that something else might be there. And ultimately, I reached a spot in which everything in my life felt critical. I had been working in television, and I'd reached a point at which I couldn't be hired. I couldn't get in to pitch a story. I couldn't even get in a room to try to sell something. And I was really forced to try to get into the movie business. And it was a crisis for me, but it was also a fabulous experience for me. It certainly didn't feel fabulous at the time. I thought of the moments in my father's life when I'd seen him struggle against a lot of crisis and seen him broken by those and yet pick himself back up. And I thought, if I'm going to go down, I want to go down with my flags flying. I want to write not what I think they want to buy, but what I want to see. I want to write what I want to tell to my sons. I want to write what moves me, inspires me, and the first thing I actually wrote in that mode was Love and Honor, the thing that's now a book. And Love and Honor was this massive historical tale, and it felt so good writing that it led me into writing Braveheart.
Now, what beyond that, what inspired you to do the story of William Wallace?
Well, the first exposure that I had to William Wallace was my wife and I wanted to have children, and she wasn't so sure at the time that she wanted to. She was a dancer, and it used to be in the Academy Awards they had dancers, and she did those like 4 times, and the Oscars, the Emmys. She was a really successful dancer, and didn't want to cut her career short, and I really wanted to have children. And she said, well, if you get me pregnant, you have to take me to Europe. And I thought that was like a really good deal. And we were expecting our first child, and she was Irish American, and everybody I ran into in California sort of had a history, and I didn't ever identify with an ethnic background. Just growing up in the South, which, by the way, is actually a characteristic of the Scots-Irish. It's like the only ethnic group in America that didn't come with an ethnic history. It's like, hey, we're here, this is where we are. And that sort of search to try to find, well, who am I and what can I tell my sons or daughters, if I should ever have them, what can I tell my children about who they are and where I came from. So when we were there, we went to Scotland, and I ran into a statue of a guy named William Wallace and said to a member of the Black Watch Guards there in Edinburgh Castle, who is this William Wallace? And he said, he's our greatest hero. So I started elbowing my wife, saying, greatest hero, Wallace. Hey. Sounds, pretty good to me. And I asked the guard if he was an ally of Robert the Bruce, and the guard said, no one knows for sure, but our legends say Robert the Bruce may have betrayed William Wallace to clear the way for him to be king. In that little sentence, I felt I had heard, it was the equivalent of being told that Judas Iscariot and St. Peter were the same individual. In that sentence was the resonance of the idea that what if the man who was born noble, who was born to be the king, learned what it meant to be noble from a commoner whose life and possibly whose death taught him what that meant. But I was terrified to begin that story. It was 10 years before I sat down to write that story.
Now, if I understand correctly, there isn't a whole lot of historic record, most of it from Blind Henry the poet, right? What's the background that you had to work with?
Yeah, and Blind Henry wrote like 300 years after William Wallace, so it was very. If you look William Wallace up in the encyclopedia.
Well, we're talking about 1314, right?
Yeah, 13. Well,
12 guys there who could write at the time.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, and most people were illiterate, and like the Bible was, or the Quran is, in many places passed down by memory. These stories were told throughout the Highlands, but. If you look William Wallace up in the Encyclopedia Britannica, it says there's almost nothing known about him. Winston Churchill, in a book or a series called The History of the English-Speaking Peoples, talks about William Wallace and says it's really the legend that inspires the people. But there's a way in which I think legends have more truth to them, not even necessarily about the figure they're about, but about the people who tell those legends. It's part of the vitality, I think, of America, that the stories we tell ourselves make us who we are as a people. They give us our identity. They tell us who we're supposed to be.
Greek myths, Arthur legends, they're all the same.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, when I was growing up, the grandmother who owned the country store, her husband had died before I was born. And everybody in the family always told me I looked like him, and there was just this burning thing in me to get to know who my grandfather was. And there was a single story that told me all about him. The story was that during the Depression, he was a farmer, but he went to work in this ice factory in Tennessee. And it was back in the days when people didn't have refrigerators, so you'd have an ice box, and you'd buy these big blocks of ice. And he went to work there, and most of the guys who were there were black. And his first day, in fact, he was the only white man who worked in this section. And his first day on the job, the foreman of the crew went up to my grandfather and said, listen, with all these other guys here on this crew, I cuss at them to make them work. So if I forget myself and I call you a son of a bitch, don't pay me no mind. I don't mean nothing by it. It's just the way I am. And my grandfather had been one of the first people to give credit to black people at his store. And he was also a Baptist deacon, and he didn't like cussing. So he looked at the guy and he said, I understand completely. And if you do call me a son of a bitch and I hit you in the face with a claw hammer, don't pay me no mind. I don't mean nothing by it, but that's just how I am. And that story, it was like that was the power of a story to me, to tell me everything I needed to know about who he was and who I was supposed to be.
Now, there may be one or two people here who would like to know how Mel Gibson got involved with this. What do you think? Maybe two or you? Three? Yeah. How did Mel end up in this?
Well, it's an incredible thing for me that I've never made a movie without having just the ideal cast. I've been so in love with the cast, inspired by the people that I got to work with, and Mel was the one that started that off. I had written the story. I never have written anything with an actor in mind. I don't think that's how you write a role that an actor wants to do. But I had written the story, and I had seen I'd seen really all of his movies. I was really impressed with his ambition and his depth. I thought his Hamlet was fantastic. I thought his guts to do Hamlet was remarkable. And I was looking for a character, a man who could play that kind of virility and also the kind of sensitivity. It's a really difficult thing to do. I realized, I hope I'm sorry if I tell this story. I think Leo would forgive me, but in making Man in the Iron Mask, Leonardo walked up to me and said, "We've got a line that I don't know how to say, and I want you to tell me how to say it." And I'd always heard you never give an actor a line reading. And so I was talking around how I wanted him to say it. And he said, no, just say the line for me. Say it how you want me to say it. And I said, well, Leo, I'm not an actor. He said, no, but I want you to. And the line was right before the Musketeers charge to what looks like a certain death. He is supposed to say, as the Man in the Iron Mask, if you give me a sword, I'd be glad to run, I'd be proud to run with you. So I said, well, Leo, I think it ought to be really plain. Just if you give me a sword, I'll be proud to run with you. And he goes, Randy, you ought to be an actor. And I said, Leo, one thing I know for sure is that I will never be an actor. And he said, yeah, but when you say that line, it sounds like every man dies, not every man really lives. But when I say it, it sounds like if you give me something sharp, I'll stick somebody with it. And it was the most brilliant way of saying to me that he felt that he was a boy compared to these towers of virility that he was standing next to. And he realized the way his character was coming across. Not that he lacked the colors to play any color he wanted to play, but that in that context, and I thought I finally understood what his issue was. I say all that to say, when a camera looks into an actor's eyes, the camera knows, the audience knows if that person believes what they're saying. And I always think that my job as a writer first and then as a director is to inspire someone else to believe, and I can't do that unless I believe myself. So Mel was the guy, and we sent the script to him and waited until we thought we wouldn't hear from him, and then had a meeting with him, and he said he really liked it, but he was going off to do something else, and I didn't realize what his issues were, and I went to Scotland myself and took pictures of the Highlands, and hoping I could direct it for maybe $5 million. And when I got back, we talked, and he said, I've been thinking about directing this thing. So that was really great news.
You were happy about it. I know he directed, what was the Man Without a Face before that, and had gotten some good reviews on that. But,
yeah.
But you have an actor directing your picture.
Yeah. That's not always good news, but no. The thing with Mel, he said something I thought was brilliant. We were sitting in a restaurant in London as we were in pre-production, and I was a little, edgy about the casting. And he looked at me, and he understood exactly what I was feeling. It was like I felt like my father felt on my sister's wedding day when my father said, Jane's got another shoulder to cry on now. And I thought, gosh, what a thought as a father. And I felt with this script like, I know how this ought to be. And people are coming up with questions, and I want to answer them, but he's the director. And he looked at me, and he said, Randy, the truth is, writers write, actors act, directors direct from their core as a person. He said, this script is you. And he said, you know, I'm going to put actors in this who are, in their essence, the characters that we want them to play. And I thought, of all the things he got credit for, there were so many that he didn't get credit for that he'd done brilliantly. And one of them was the casting of this movie.
So how did you decide what historical facts to leave out of the story and which ones to bend slightly, not that there were all that many there to begin with?
Yeah, that's always a great question. I had a guy from the London Times call me up really kind of sniffy. And he said, Mr. Wallace, what do you consider your responsibilities as a historian? And I said, well, I'm not a historian, I'm a dramatist. If you use a highfalutin title for it, I'm a storyteller. And he said, yes, but you've actually, and I was saying, hey, Hamlet has nothing to do with Denmark, and Romeo and Juliet has nothing to do with Italy. It's about people. And he said, yes, but you've made it seem as if our current British royal family are direct descendants of William Wallace. And I said, well, I really want to apologize for that. It was never my intention to demean the memory of William Wallace. And he had no sense of humor about it. But I tell you, it's like the best answer I can give is actually about Love and Honor. That started with a couple of facts. I came across them. I was first fascinated by the idea that America sprang from a time in which there were all these titans living. I mean, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Diderot, Voltaire, Beethoven, Catherine the Great. They were all alive at the same time. They'd had cell phones. They could have talked to each other. And we have these beliefs that we accept, that every person is born equal, that we all have a right to live and be free and to be happy. And there was a time not long ago, I mean 200 years ago is not that long, when common people had to stand on battlefields with blades and muskets and assert their rights as human beings. And yet we have elections and sometimes less than half of us vote. And I was stirred up by that idea. But what happened inside us? What happened inside our ancestors to make them say America is a thing, not a dream. It's a reality. We will make it so.
And we have to keep making it so.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so, I started reading about Catherine the Great and came across this tidbit. And the tidbit was that Catherine the Great had in her royal court beautiful young women who were called provers. And their job was to sleep with the handsome young men in the officer corps and bring the best lovers to the queen. That was their job. I've never said that.
Were there perks?
Yeah, I think that was the perk. I've never said that to women who haven't gone, yeah, that's my kind of queen. And also then as I kept reading, I came across the fact that the British government tried to get Catherine the Great to give them 20,000 soldiers, Russian soldiers fresh from war with the Turks, to destroy the American Revolution. That was a fact as well. And those two facts sort of overrode everything else. The idea about could love live in a place like that? And what would it take to maintain your ideals and your integrity in a place like that? And so I came up with the idea of a fictional soldier who is sent to Catherine the Great's Russia to save the American Revolution. The story began to speak to me and tell itself. And so, my sense of it is that a story needs to be plausible. But facts are weird things. If all of us were to see an event, we would experience in a different way what that was. So that's why I like to get into a story from the point of view of a person's heart, because that's where we all live. It's not from our head.
How close was the shooting script to the original draft? Change things on the fly?
A Braveheart, There's an interesting, I think, answer to that. My sense of it is that Braveheart, the original script of Braveheart, is as close to the final product as any movie I've ever seen or heard of. To me, it feels verbatim, though in fact there are a couple of lines that were not ad-libs exactly, but Mel felt at the moment that would be right, and they are there. But the story is so much, in my view, a product of the script. And if the script is available in places, and I'd love to know people's opinion of that. But my sense is it's almost verbatim. However, in order to shoot a script like that, a director has to completely internalize everything. And one of the amazing things about Mel as a director is that he didn't start the process by telling me what he wanted to do. He started the process by asking me what I meant by everything, and he wanted me to tell him the scenes that I had cut out already and what I had left out and why I had done that. So it was a fabulous collaboration.
Well, that kind of, and this is the area where I get to ask the question that has been floating around a little bit in the recent press, largely because of the Passion of the Christ. There's sort of a tale going around that Mel likes to, or finds himself in positions where he actually wants to amp up the degree of suffering his characters take on. And God knows there's a fair amount of suffering in this for his character, but one of the lines is, and I don't know if I give it any credence, but the stories are saying that he was having Ron Howard punch up, some of the agonizing scenes he was going through in Ransom. Was anything like that happen on this film? This seems to be sort of the crystallization of that tale.
No, I've heard it said not particularly about Mel, but about a lot of actors that they enjoy the process of they're drawn to characters who are just beaten to a pulp, who rise up again. That there might be something in terms of the actor's experience and psyche that relates to that. I see it in a different way. I think that what happens that there's probably not a heart beating. There's not a living soul who doesn't feel a sense of vulnerability and to relate to joy, you experience your own pain. You have to be open to it and honest about it and confronting of it. And one of the things I love about Braveheart is the way it endorses that. I think that writing a movie and certainly directing one is a process of finding the sacred moments. I love the phrase movie moments. I think that's a wonderful phrase about that experience of when there's a great moment in a film and you remember it always. But I see it from a spiritual perspective as a question of what is sacred to you, what hits you like it's in the holiest place in your life and makes you remember it. I remember a few times in my life walking out of a film and saying, my life is never going to be quite the same because of what I experienced. And that's the way I want movies to be. Those are the kinds of movies that I want to be involved with making. And I have to just tell you a little story. When I was doing We Were Soldiers, preparing for that, I went to Ranger School. And there's this place at Fort Benning, Georgia. And at the end of it, the general who allowed me to go and train with his Rangers took me to this place called the Ranger Burger. And we had lunch there, and it's like this half a steer on a bun. And and so when it was over, when the general had to leave, and I stayed because I hadn't finished my meal, and I was there with a couple of the sergeants who had kind of kept me alive for the last 2 weeks. And the woman who owned the place came over and said, and she was about 4 feet tall and 4 feet wide, a little southern woman. And she said, "Did you write Braveheart?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I did." And she said, "Oh, I can't stand the ending of that movie." And the guys next to me cracked up because and she said, "Of course, we watch it twice a week in the bar here." And so, and I was in love. I was ready to, take her home and adopt her, or have her adopt me. But I said, well, what is it? Is it too gory for you? And she said, oh, that don't bother me. It reminds me of my brother. And all of a sudden, all the air just left the room. And I said, well, what about your brother? And she said, well, my brother was 10 months older than me. And all my life, I felt like whenever he breathed out, I breathed in. And I thank God every day that my husband had come home a week before. They came to tell me my brother had been killed in Vietnam. So, I was sitting there just totally just blown away. I looked at these guys next to me who were hardened rangers. I mean, these guys were life takers, and tears were rolling down their face. And then she looked at me and she said, I hadn't been able to breathe right since that day. And she walked away. And this is a woman that spends her life making hamburgers for soldiers so they feel like that they've had a home-cooked meal. And
Sacred moments.
it's a sacred moment. It was like that she, in Braveheart, even if she couldn't look at the end, felt within it that it was by people who cared. And that to me is the ultimate answer to your question. However one might analyze Mel, the absolute bottom line is that he cared with all of his heart and all of his might. And I did, and everybody involved did. And in the making of We Were Soldiers, it was the same way. And it's like I'm sorry to roll away with this question, but
For a moment like that, I think we'll let you go on that one,
I just, there's a thing I want to say, and I'm sorry, I grew up a Southern Baptist, so a crowd is like irresistible to me to, I won't try to take a collection, which is a very Baptist thing to do.
But we will.
But you guys will. But I always remember when I'm, for me to be sitting here and acting like I have anything to say or give or pontificate on, I really, truly don't mean it that way, but I just relate so much to the aspirations that we have when we are in this town. And I know that so many of you are artists in your lives and in your hearts. And the thing to me about it all is that, it may not be the ultimate case that you'll make your movie or you'll write your song or you'll act in a given role, but you'll live your life. And mine has taken me different places that I never expected. When I started, I came across this phrase that is in Love and Honor. It's a Russian proverb. And the proverb is, when a man is born, he'll walk one of three roads. There are no others. On the path to the left, the wolves will eat him. On the path to the right, he'll eat the wolves. On the path down the middle, he'll eat himself. And I think so many of us, I know it's true for me, spend so much time gnawing at ourselves and blaming ourselves instead of accepting that there is a struggle in living every day, but living is a great gift. When I read that, I went to Save On and bought a big yellow poster board and red magic markers, and I wrote the words, "Eat the wolves," and I nailed it to the wall over my typewriter. And for 4 years, I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and look at that sign and type, and that's how I wrote Love and Honor, the novel, before I ever knew I would write movies. So I just want to say, believe in yourself. It's not necessarily the outcome none of us can predict, but living like that's the only way I know to live. And then
And wolves can be tasty when properly prepared. One more question here, and it's from this fellow in the front row, Bob Gale. Tell us about the first sneak preview. And what, did you make any changes after you sneaked it and after you had a chance to show it to some folks?
in Braveheart.
In Braveheart.
The first preview we had, there were, I think, I don't want to exaggerate this number, but I think it was 35 walkouts. And what was happening was that Mel had really pushed the envelope of the violence, and it was not so much like an obsession with violence.
It's just that when you start fighting with maces and chains, people have a tendency to get sort of beat up.
Yeah, it was.
That was one of the great things about. I love period films, and the medieval warfare was the thing that really took me about this film. And I mean, not reveling in its brutalness, but the fact that, geez, this is really a brutal way to fight. You'd really have to mean it.
Right, right. There was a sense, I think, of let's tell the truth. And if we have an ability with a film to show what really happened, let's show it. And a lot of the walkouts occurred right before the end because people thought, having seen the other gore in the battles, that they were going to actually be treated to the execution scene. That ultimately is what changed in the subsequent viewings of it. It was one of my sweetest moments, actually, in writing it, which came full circle to see it, was I knew the story really unfolded as I wrote it. I mean, I remember typing Braveheart on a title page for the first time, thinking that's what I think the title should be. When I was writing the end, I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew that I was writing that the axe begins to fall. And I thought, I do not want to see, even if we could show it. I don't want to. Don't give it away? Okay.
Thank you. That's a valid point of view.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'll tell you. I'll give you an answer without ruining the ending. Someone appears that I never expected to see in the ending of the movie, and I sat at my desk and I wept, and it was the sweetest. I know it sounds like that character in Romancing the Stone, the romance writer that sits and cries as she writes her story.
Well, other writers have told us the same thing, that their characters up and do things that they don't even expect.
Yeah, and that's a sacred moment too. And it was something that said to me, there is honor in this that's happening. There is glory and love and fulfillment in the ending this way, and always, even with all the battlefield realism that is in the movie and that Mel wanted in the movie, he never once wavered from that being the way the picture should end. I always believed that it was, by the grace of God, that had there been other actors, they might have said, well, this has to end completely differently. But that was not the case with Mel.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've had a few sacred moments with Randall Wallace. Give him a big round of applause.